Greetings and welcome to today's program, a financial wellness workshop for women. My name is Kristen Kolish. Some of you I know, others I do not. Welcome. By way of background, I am a retirement plan consultant. I work with employers and employees to navigate their corporate retirement plans. I've also worked with individuals and families on their own financial plans. And I commonly speak on all sorts of topics, whether it be fiduciary governance. I did cybersecurity last month, investing basics, advanced investing classes, and I'd love to share that this is actually my absolute favorite topic, not the least of which for selfish reasons, right? It's applicable to me. Of course, it's applicable to my clients who I love, but also my mother, my sister, my friends. And it's a conversation that I find in my personal social circle that is just not usually coming to the forefront when women get together. Money and financial planning and investing is generally a topic that is avoided for a whole host of reasons. I'm particularly excited about this audience today because not only are many of the registrants women, you also happen to be HR professionals or financial professionals. So you're really wearing two hats today. You are learning for yourself, and you're also potentially advocating for your employees. And there's an exponential impact then to today's discussion. I do want to just share some housekeeping items. The program is going to be recorded. I'm happy to share that when it's available within a week's time. I'm also happy to share the slides. So please don't feel like you need to take copious notes. You can refer back to them. I want you to listen, take it all in. And really, if you could think of maybe one or two actionable items that you can take away from today's conversation, because admittedly, I'm going to cover a wide breadth of topics. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Rome wasn't built in a day. There's lots of sayings to that effect. It's a marathon, not a sprint when it comes to sound financial planning. And really, our goal is to get you better than where you were before. So a little bit of progress can go a long way. I also want to share that the financial planning fundamentals I'm going to be reviewing is applicable regardless of your gender. There's so certain nuances that women in particular have to be attuned to. And lastly, I'm going to make some generalities. And what do we know? We know that individuals are unique, whether that's in the investing world, the workplace, in our personal lives. We're all individuals. So I may say something and you're like, well, that's not really like me. And that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Just I ask you to kind of go with it and not take offense, but know that the information I'm sharing is based on some studies, and studies are not always based on every individual, right? There's some statistics involved for sure. So today's conversation, it's going to be split into two parts. In the beginning, I'm going to talk about the unique financial challenges and opportunities facing your female workforce. And then we're going to take some time talking about 6 steps to sound financial planning. And keep this in the back of your head if you're feeling like you should be further along with your own financial plan. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. So one last background story to just kind of put today's conversation in context. It's actually the 20th anniversary for me personally since I've hosted my first Women and Investing program. And if I rewind 20 years, I was at a point in my career where I was transitioning from being in the investment banking world to becoming a financial advisor and working with companies and with individuals. So at that point in my life, I had just, prior to becoming an investment banking analyst, I had gotten a finance degree at Georgetown. I was studying to be a CFA charter holder. And at the time, the industry was predominantly male. So I was used to being the minority in the room. And that was fine. I got very comfortable with that. So the way that I approached these sessions was to impart knowledge, to educate the women that were in the room about some very important investing fundamentals. And it's funny what time and some experience will do, but here I am 20 years later, and I'm no longer a single working woman. I am a married mother with 3 kids, trying to juggle a career that I love, but also a family I love. And I'm just appreciating that the reason why women need to get spoken to specifically on this topic has nothing to do with the content, the education. There is a knowledge gap in this country when it comes to investing. But guess what? It's not just for women. Like financial literacy is something every gender needs to get better at. Our lives are just more complicated, period, end of discussion, right? And we've got some great opportunities, as it says here, great challenges as well. So it's worth spending some time thinking about what our life path looks like, because our financial journeys are different than men oftentimes. In fact, this idea of women having financial independence and really owning their financial future, in the grand scheme of things in the United States, really across the globe, is relatively new. Believe it or not, 1974, 50 years ago, it's a date that is ingrained in my head because it's actually when ERISA, or the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which governs 401ks and pensions and the like, was passed. But something else important happened that year. Women were finally allowed to apply for credit without their husband's approval. Can you believe that was only 50 years ago? I cannot. So this idea of financial progress, we've really come a long way in a short amount of time. So let's dive in. I'm actually going to take my video off and you can concentrate on the slides and my remarks. So as we start the discussion, why are we here? I kind of set the backdrop, but women are the future of wealth management, of investing, because for a variety of reasons, we're going to control a lot of wealth and we're going to control a lot of financial decisions. But we also have some headwinds to combat. For one, having a child can cost the average high-skilled woman over $200,000 in lost lifetime wages. And that's based on a very recent study. Here's the good news. Women are paid 84 cents on the dollar to every dollar a man earns. You're thinking to yourself, why is that good news? Well, when last time I refreshed this information a few years back, it was 82 cents. So we're getting a little bit stronger. And there is an asterisk that should be made on that statistic, is that it does depend on where you are in your life stage. Young women and young men, when they're coming out of school, are paid comparably. But what we see over time, again, basically because of divergent career paths, over time, that effect is cumulative. So when you look in aggregate, women are paid 84 cents on the dollar. We're going to talk about some very exciting things. We're going to talk about things that may not be as exciting and a little intimidating. But because of our longevity bonus, so that's the bright side of this discussion, on average, women live longer. We are 4 times more likely than men to be widowed. And that, coupled with a whole host of other potential scenarios, means that for 90% of us, at some point in our lives, we're going to be solely responsible for finances. So it is very, very, very important for you to own it, really, and to feel confident in your own financial plan. And that's really a lot about what today's discussion is about. We need to improve our confidence, because if we're confident in our financial plan, we may not be where we want to be now, but we're confident that we're at least making progress that, from an emotional and from a psychological standpoint, is going to allow you to make better decisions. So those are the challenges. There's lots of great news to share. Over 50% of us are the primary breadwinners. There should be an asterisk to that point as well. I heard in a recent podcast that in a study that was run by Fidelity, actually, that the average female breadwinner works or does at least 1 hour more of unpaid labor than their male counterparts. So you think about all of the things that happen outside of the workplace with your HR and your finance hats, you have an appreciation. Then when your employees are at work, they've got a lot on their plates. There's a lot of things going through their heads. And that's just one example of the complications that we are really navigating in our lives. 9 in 10 women say they are involved in the spending and investing decisions, and that's a huge improvement. By just about a decade earlier, it was half that. 2/3 of personal wealth in this country is controlled by women, and it's interesting, as baby boomers age and ultimately their heirs inherit dollars, that's a relatively new phenomenon. They call it intergenerational wealth transfer. And a lot of the potential recipients is the female workforce and the female investors. Women are 60% more likely to have a college degree than men. We are becoming very educated. And think about back in that stat with 1974 at the time, many colleges were just opening their door to women. So really a tremendous amount of progress in a relatively short amount of time. There should be an asterisk to this fact and statistic as well. 60% more of us have a college degree. What that translates to is that 2/3 of women, women have 2/3 more in student loan debt than men. So on the one hand, yes, we've got a lot of our future is bright, but we're coming into the workforce, maybe straddled with some debt. And when you think about, let's say, employee education, when it comes to 401k plans or 403b plans and the like, I often get asked, where should my next dollar go? And that can be a complicated decision. And it's one where it could be a different answer for everybody, whether it's contributing to your 401k to get a match, if that's an option, or if you have debt and that debt is expensive, sometimes paying down debt is a different way to save. And that could make more sense than, in fact, contributing to the 401k. So there's a lot of moving parts there. And ultimately, I love this phrase, when women work, economies grow. And that's what we've seen time and time again. We are an economic force to be reckoned with. However, and especially for those folks who are HR professionals, none of this is going to be new. In fact, you probably know this even better than I do. While we're making progress, less than 25% of corporate board seats globally are held by women. North America is slightly better. 20% of senior management positions globally held by women. For every 100 men who are promoted from entry-level roles to manager, 87 are promoted. And I think the most startling statistics on this page is the last one. And this is where we've got to figure out a solution to make this work. For every woman at the director level who gets promoted, 2 women directors are choosing to leave your company. That's astounding. So on the one hand, we're making progress, but on a net basis, we may in fact be taking a step backwards. So I know there's lots of strategies for you to think about that. It's not just looking at gender pay gaps and closing it and looking for parity. It's developing career paths. It's cultivating your employees. It's listening to them. What do they need to be successful? With that comes, of course, a word that we hear all the time is flexibility. But when we dive deeper, women are choosing to leave their companies for a variety of reasons. And the younger women under the age of 30 are even more likely to make a change. And the number one reason that they're citing is that they don't feel that they have an opportunity to advance in their current job. That's something that takes some proactive planning and career development and career path cultivation to combat. Now, when we turn back to the financial side of this, many of us are in charge of the spending in our households. And it's no surprise that the advertisers and the marketing dollars are geared towards women because we make a lot of these decisions. When you think about consumption, day-to-day budgeting, that has historically been something that the female in the household has controlled. When it comes to investing, making decisions about stocks and bonds and asset allocation, that's something where historically has been dominated by the male counterpart in the household, but something that we're slowly but surely getting better at, not the least of which is because we have our own money today. You know, back in the 1970s, it was very common for a woman's financial future. You're going to get married and then it's joint. But more and more of us are working longer before getting married, perhaps not even getting married. And there's a lot of, we've talked already about the gender pay gap. I mentioned the phrase knowledge gap. Here we're going to talk about inflation gap. So at the start, we are more expensive beings, right? I think about what it costs me to have my hair colored, every 6 weeks, and just living the life of a woman. It's just generally, and this is a gross generalization, so I wholeheartedly admit that, but tends to be more expensive. And here you've got the numbers to show it. The economists call it the quote unquote pink tax. The fact that women's products are more expensive than men's on average. In fact, if you buy something that's pink, there's tend to be a premium. And what's scary about this is the inflation gap, because the inflation on these types of items are higher than on aggregate. And if you're already starting off of a higher base, particularly in this current economic environment, inflation is started, the rate of inflation is starting to more normalize based off of what we saw in 2021 and 2022, but it's not deflationary, right? So it costs more today, a lot more today than it did to live just a few years ago. So when we think about awarenesses we need to have in our financial plan, we need to be on sound financial footing. You don't want to be in a position, and I've seen it too many times to be comfortable, where someone or that has been thrown into a situation where they have to make financial decisions, and it's during a period that they're not emotionally stable, maybe going through a divorce or dealing with a death in the family or illness. And we know there's some economic realities that has really been a challenge when it comes to retirement planning and savings. The fact that many women, especially during COVID, had to change the way that their career path looked like. I mentioned we're living longer. Now, this third column here is starting to talk about women as investors. And I'd say we lack confidence. I don't know about that. I think we just, and again, another generalization, we want to know, we're willing to rely upon experts and get advice. And we're willing to acknowledge when maybe we need a little bit of help, and maybe we're better at that than our male counterparts. We have tended to be more conservative investors, and that has a potential detrimental impact, because we're living longer, we need our assets to grow. We want to give ourselves the opportunity to have that, to certainly have that happen. And overall, and I think this is any investor, I mean, honestly, the idea that you're making decisions that are going to impact your financial future is an intimidating idea. And I think many investors just have a fear of making a mistake. So we're going to try to simplify that for you. Now, the drivers of low confidence in investing, well, many of us weren't taught. So that's one thing to consider. And maybe it's a little bit of arrogance on the other side, but we tend to be better financial planners. We're good at planning, and we want to learn how to be better financial planners. We're protective of our assets, so that's the bullet about tending to be more conservative. Now, I am absolutely not a fan of reading off of slides, but if you bear with me for a minute, I'm going to read this quote to you, and it kind of sets the backdrop for moving into the next session of our discussion. It is literally impossible to be a woman. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money, because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. You have to be a career woman, but also always be looking out for other people. And the quote and the monologue goes on and on and on. And if I was doing this session in person, I'd ask if you knew what quote this was from. If you haven't seen, and I'm not suggesting or giving a recommendation on the movie, but if you have not seen America Ferrera's monologue in the Barbie movie, please look it up. I thought it was incredible. And in many ways, it captured the nuances of just living a complicated, and complicated not meaning in a negative tone. Complicated has the opportunity to be tremendously amazing, right? We just need to plan for that. So that complication on this slide translates into our financial lives. So think about where you are on this page. Are you a working professional? Are you a caregiver? Are you a current retiree or a widower? Maybe you fit in more than one of those columns. On the left-hand side of the page, there's potential priorities or concerns you may have. And then on the right-hand side of the page, financial objectives that you could be striving for. Now, I could spend honestly 30 minutes describing each of these bullets, but I'm going to, at the end of this program, have a few slides that I call my food for thought slides. And that's where I think it would be wise to spend some time. I'm going to run through them quickly, but it's a number of questions. And what I would like you to think about is what are the areas that, one, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, stress you out, the saying, what keeps you up at night? You want to identify that so you can own it and manage it. And then the second piece is, what are the things that you just need to overall get smarter about? And if you've answered those two questions, you're really making some great progress on owning that financial future. The unique style of women's, I've mentioned a little bit, is that we actually, from a performance standpoint, and of course this is a generality, but Raymond James recently put out a segment on women investors and showed that we trade 27% less frequently, and that oftentimes can lead to outperformance on a risk-adjusted basis. So that could be a good thing. We tend to be good savers. So women are 14% more likely to participate in their company's retirement plans, which is fantastic. But where did I start? We're making 84 cents on the dollar. So maybe we're saving 6% instead of 4%, and that's just for illustrative purposes. But if it's off of a smaller base, we still have a gap to make up. And what's interesting, 80% of us have children during our lifetimes, and 67% of us are the primary caregiver to older adult relatives. Sometimes that's happening at the same time, which is termed the sandwich generation. I talked about confidence. Here's the bright light. The bright light is that I think our younger workforce, our younger women workforce, has a little bit more confidence, perhaps because they have been taught by their mothers, and I'm trying to do this with my daughter, some important fundamentals, which is, your financial future is not getting married. Your financial future is owning your financial future. I think all people want this, but ultimately you want to be financially secure. And that means something different for everybody. Maybe it means being debt free. Maybe it means being real knowledgeable about investing. Maybe it means investing to fulfill your goals, and those goals are going to be different. So now we're going to transition to the part of the conversation where I outline financial planning fundamentals. So we're going to set the groundwork. I am not diving into like what's a stock, what's a bond. I can do programs like that. That's important information. But here, I want you to focus on the things that you get to control. The things you get to control include how much you save, how much you spend within reason, how much risk you take in your portfolio. I want to share that we don't get to control what happens with the financial markets. A lot of the financial planning process is reflective, and it's quote unquote easier to evaluate investments. Is this a good investment? Is this a bad investment? And it depends what it's doing and for what people. So you can't put those labels on investments per se, but it's more quantitative, it's definitive. When I talk about building a vision of your future, what are your milestones? What are your goals? For one, there's a lot of what ifs. And I'd encourage you to think through the prism of what might be ideal for you and what is acceptable, because over time, there are certain triggers that we have, levers, so to speak, that we have to play with. If you don't mind coming to work, maybe you'd be willing to work a little bit longer if it means you're going to have that much more in retirement to spend. Let's say you mentally are like, I cannot work past the age of 62. Okay, well, then that translates into other trade-offs. Maybe you need to save a little bit more during your working years. So when I think about having a financial plan, there are 6 facets here. One is to identify and stress test goals. So that's the umbrella of financial planning. And then underneath that is investment management and understanding your risk tolerance. It's identifying what risks do you have, not just risks of being in the financial markets like stock risks, but what are the risks that could impede your ability to be financially successful? So maybe there's an insurance need. And a lot of this has some parallels to your employer benefits. So think about that. Your disability insurance, life insurance, healthcare. Those are risks that your employees have that you're helping to insure against. Do you have debt outstanding? How do you handle banking? There's good debt and bad debt. I would put what's good debt? Good debt might be a mortgage because it allows you to build equity in a home within reason. Bad debt is credit card debt, where you are spending above your means, and the credit card companies know it, so they charge a pretty penny for that financing. So when you think about if you have credit card debt and where should your next dollar go, maybe it should go to pay down debt and work towards that saving goal. The next facet is estate planning and family wealth transfer. Not all these topics are things that make us feel good. Like when you think about the end of your own life or your family's life, that's borderline depressing. But it's something we need to think about and plan for. Particularly if you have children, you need to have a will that names a guardian. It's not something I know personally. It's not something that I enjoy doing, but it's something that needs to be done. And actually, a little footnote there is that you'd be surprised that through retirement plan providers, they're building out the employee wellness tools and offering beyond just retirement planning. So there's some providers that could, tie your employees to a law firm that may be willing to write a simple will for them. So it's a good takeaway. I know many of you were thinking about this through your own personal financial plan, but it's a good takeaway to ask your vendors what's new, because there's a lot new. And then lastly, and this is a great time of year to be having this conversation, tax planning. April 15th is around the corner. We tend to get our financial affairs in order during the first quarter of the year. This is a great time to take step one, which I'm going to talk to in a minute, getting organized. So honestly, this slide tells a full story. I could spend a ton of time on here. And if there's a couple slides that you want to go back to, maybe this is one of them. I love this quote from Benjamin Franklin: "Failing to plan is planning to fail." I'm stating that from admittedly someone who obsesses over planning, maybe to a fault. But thinking about how do you lay the foundation? Do you have a budget? How are you saving? Do you have a cash cushion or emergency cash reserve? And don't just listen to this part, because I'm going to get into more detail on a lot of these concepts in a moment. If you're working, chances are you're in the accumulation stage of your careers. I cannot stress enough the biggest asset, the most important asset that those workers who are on the younger side have is time. And the earlier you could put even just a few dollars away, your future self will thank you. It's so incredibly important. And when I think about what are the attributes of very successful investors, for one, they're patient. They're patient, meaning that they have the perspective of knowing if the markets aren't doing well, okay, let's see and let's let it ride it out. And then they've also thought about their time horizon. So when you think about your spending needs, and this is a concept, quite frankly, I try to introduce to my children, what's a need and what's a want? Okay, so we need to eat dinner, but you might want to buy a pack of gum. Like, that's a very simplistic example. And thinking about, and this is actually a bullet, and I've done programs on this as well, teaching sound financial habits to our kids. Quite admittedly, it's something that I continue to still struggle with. But the idea of, if you're being asked, can I have something? I know the store is closed, but I remember when my kids were younger, we go into Toys R Us to buy a birthday present, and I want that, I want that, I want that. And after doing some research, I actually changed my tune. Instead of saying, no, 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 I said, okay, well, put it on your wish list. And what does a wish list mean? A wish list means if it's important enough to you, you're either, if someone asks, what can I have for, let's say, a gift or birthday, graduation, you could tell them that, or you could save for it. The takeaway is that you're removing the immediate gratification. And that's something that in today's society is so difficult to combat. And you're getting them to think longer term. And I actually think there's an analogy to that to budgeting, which I'm going to get to in a minute when we get to that step. But step one, again, it's a great time of year to be doing it. Get yourself organized. And again, this is my industry. And I am guilty of not spending enough time on my own financial plan. You actually have to schedule the time. So if you say I'll do it when I have free time, it's not going to happen. None of us have free time, right? You got to make the time. Put it on the calendar, whether it's an hour, 2 hours, whatever, where you're going to take your statements, you're going to take your look at your estate planning documents if you have or don't have them, see what insurance you may have. There's all sorts of tools out there to help get organized, and I can certainly share if that's something that you have interest. But step one is just getting to the point where you can start to know your numbers. What does your situation look like today? Step two, and this is not a step two that you're going to check a box and be done. This evolves over time. What are your goals? And when I think about a goal, it has three important elements. It has a time frame, it has a dollar amount, and you're going to categorize it as, is this a need or is this a want? And I'm sure you've heard this mantra in other aspects of your lives, but setting SMART goals. And what does that mean? They're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So if you were to say, okay, I want to retire early, that's not a goal, that's a wish. If you were to say, I want to retire at the age of 64 with the ability to spend $75,000 a year after tax, and also have $10,000 a year to travel. Okay, now we're talking. Now we're talking specific, measurable, achievable. That depends on the actions you're taking during your working years, could be relevant and certainly time bound. And the goals that we have, like retirement is the one that's like the big one, right? And the idea that at some point I'm no longer going to have a paycheck and I'm going to have to rely upon either Social Security, my own savings. Some of us have pensions, most of us don't, I do not, and really planning for that big, big day. But if we just talk to your workforce about retirement, you're going to lose them. Right? Because for so many of us, that's not our most pressing concern. I think about Stephen Covey and the book that 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about quadrants, what's in quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4. And the quadrants are broken out into what is important and what is time sensitive. And we have a tendency, for obvious reasons, to manage the things that are time sensitive. But if you were to take a step back and say, in the grand scheme of things, how important is this task? It may not be. So our challenge, both in our professional and personal lives, is to carve time out for what I call those quadrant 2 activities, the ones that are important, but don't necessarily need to be done today. And that's where the planning comes in. So and depending on where your life stage is, some of these goals may be applicable. Maybe it's managing student debt. Maybe it's saving for a child's education. Business owners have other challenges as they get closer to a point where they may want to retire. Pre-retirees are going to be concerned about Social Security and Medicare, all of which is knowledge, and you want to get there. But step one is identifying, what's in front of me? What's my next right decision? Here's some more examples of short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, needs and wants. Paying off credit card debt, that's a great short-term goal. And I would argue that's a need because that is a noose around your neck when it comes to saving. Wanting to take a family trip. This slide says 2000. My family and I went to Disney World last week, and I'll tell you, depending on where you're going, it could be a multiple of that. So maybe that's not an annual trip. And then thinking about, what are that ideal and acceptable goals? Like, what's acceptable is I have enough money to live when I stop working, or what might be acceptable is I'm going to save towards my child's education. What would be ideal is if I could pay it off all for a private school and there's no student loans, but that may or may not be realistic. So from a know your numbers standpoint, whether you consciously are able to give us a number or not, all of these categories fit into your life in some way, shape, or form. So you think about what are the things, what's your net worth? And there's, for those of the finance professional here, we're just talking financial statements, financial statement analysis, but personally. So what's your balance sheet look like? That's the difference between your assets and your liabilities. An asset would be a balance in a 401k plan. It could be savings accounts, checking accounts. It could be investments accounts. Those are financial assets. Non-financial assets might include equity in your home. So what's a liability? Liability, I'm running down credit card debt, but I'm sticking to it. That's in my view one of the worst kinds. Credit card debt, you could have student loan debt, you could have mortgage debt. What do you owe? And knowing what's your cost of financing on what you owe? What's the interest rate that you're being charged for that debt? Then look at your cash flow. And this is a funny one because I find that there's two camps of people, either those that know to the penny how much they spend and those that are really have no idea. But there are budget worksheets that I can share. There's a lot of great information out there. But if I were to just say back of the envelope, think about as a household, what is your income? And again, great time of year, look at your W-2, look at your tax returns. What's your income? Take out what you saved, whether that be in a retirement plan or whether that be outside. Subtract what you've paid in taxes. The difference of those items is what you spent. You may not know where you spent it, but those are your expenses. And your challenge is to own that and to know, is it going in the places that I want it to go in? So I referenced before the example with children, thinking about a wish list, because all of us were like, I want. Even you show up, I don't know how my phone knows that I looked at a particular blouse, but it keeps showing it to me, right? And I need to have I don't want to say I need to have the self-control to say no, because I don't. What I need to do is to reflect on, is that something that's important to me? Way back when I first started doing education meetings for employees, give the example of, let's say if you go and you buy your Starbucks coffee every day, how much in Starbucks you could have spent. And I'm not picking on Starbucks, could be Dunkin' or any place. How much that could have been in savings over the course of your career, right? And the idea is, try to save where you can. And that's a good message. And that's a good message for the masses, but I don't know if that's so sustainable. And I love the analogy of so many of us think about our budget as a diet. It's restrictive. Like I'm telling you, you can't go to Starbucks or you can't go to Dunkin' Donuts. And that's not the way a successful budget works. You need to reflect and think about, well, what's important to you? Perhaps going to a coffee shop daily, maybe it's part of your ritual. It's the way you take a break in the afternoon. Maybe you go with a friend or you meet a friend or a colleague, and that's important to you. That's fine. Just plan for it and budget for it. I like to think about a budget as a permission slip. You're giving yourself permission to fund the things that are important to you, knowing that if you are allocating too much to a certain line item, that life is a series of trade-offs, then you're going to have to balance it by spending less elsewhere. So visually, this applies to everyone. You could think about what's your income from employment, maybe you have income from investments or one-time earnings, and then your expenditures. What are your needs or your essentials? Where are you saving and investing? The lifestyle expenditures, I kind of put in that one category. And do you have a cash reserve? And this is really important because we found, particularly during COVID, those that had the financial wherewithal to bridge a gap of income, particularly as really the world was shutting down, was able to benefit from when the markets turned around. But those of us that either had to take a distribution from our 401k or had to take a loan, they actually took multiple steps backwards. So the gap between those that are doing well and those that aren't really has exasperated. I get this question a lot, how much should I be spending? Well, you should be measuring it for sure. And this is a general rule of thumb, maybe 50% on necessities, 30% on wants, 20% on funding your financial goals. This is about as rough of an estimate as you can get. And what I don't want you to do is to say, oh God, I'm saving 2%. There's no way I can get to 20 and just like close your brain off. What I want you to think about is, I don't know if 20 is the right number. It may not be. Maybe it's 15, or maybe you have, who knows? It could be different. You want to think about, if I'm at 2, how can I get to 4? It's baby steps, baby steps. Just, I have a friend who likes to say, and this isn't just as it relates to financial decisions, but really any decisions in life, just make your next right decision. Like, you can't worry about what's going to happen, 10 steps down the road. Just make your next right decision. And that could be just saving a little bit more. This is probably one of the most dense slides in the program. It outlines the different buckets that you could save into. It may be helpful when you think about your own corporate benefits, because it talks about how the tax implications are. And again, tax is something you should be speaking to an accountant about, but pre-tax contributions go in, as the name implies, pre-tax and gross tax deferred. So in retirement, when you take money out, and that's like a 401k or 403b, you're going to be taxed at your then ordinary income tax bracket. You now have the ability to save in a Roth within the 401k. And the way that works, it's actually the mirror image, the polar opposite, where you're saving after-tax dollars and those dollars are growing tax exempt. With the health savings account, I could do a whole program, honestly, on that. If you offer a high deductible medical plan and you offer health savings accounts, I just put a little pin in this topic. I strongly encourage you to be ensuring that the education you're providing your employees is comprehensive. And what I mean by that is that when you're educating on the 401k, you're also educating on the HSA, because in the spirit of where should my next dollar be going, corporate employer benefits are often sideload, but for an individual, it's part of one plan. So you need to get them to think about that. And health savings accounts, if you have the cash flow to do it, if you can save and invest it, it has the potential to be triple tax exempt. That means you put in pre-tax, it grows tax-free, and if you take it out for qualifying expenses, that could also be tax-free. So it has the potential for that. So there's a lot of potential education topics on this slide alone, but this is an area where the idea is, okay, what should I be saving and where should I be saving? The next question is, how should I be saving and how should I be investing? Now, the idea of risk tolerance is a personal decision. And there's two sides of this coin. It's what's your ability to take on risk. And as women, if we have a longer time horizon, so maybe our ability to take on risk is higher, quite frankly, because we need the assets to grow. As an individual, what's your comfort with risk? Well, that's where maybe we're a little bit more conservative and want to think about that in a little different way. Ultimately, the driver of the risk in your portfolio is going to be your asset allocation. So that's investment jargon, whether it's conscious or not. Everyone has an asset allocation, and that's simply stated the split between, let's say, stocks, bonds, and cash, return-seeking assets, and something that might be a little bit less risky. And over time, studies have found that that's the #1 contributor of your performance. So there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of time spent on, should I buy this fund or that fund? And maybe it's a good time to invest or a bad time to invest. But there's a saying, and it's that to be successful, it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. And that speaks to that so vitally important time horizon I spoke about. So the ability to start earlier is so helpful. Now, asset allocation, and again, this lends itself to like an investing 101 discussion. You know, what is a stock? Stock is ownership in a company. What is it? A bond? A bond is you're actually lending money to either the government or a company. And what's cash? Cash helps to manage volatility, reduce exposure to volatility. You don't need to be an expert here. So that's my message today, is that yes, you want to be educated. And I think it's super important for you to know this. You know, how much do you have in stocks and bonds, broadly speaking? How much do you have in cash that's available? Particularly with, particularly with your benefits programs where, let's say, your 401k plan is managed by a retirement committee, you've hired a third-party advisor to give you recommendations. Usually those investments are already vetted, and you want to think about the amount of risk that you're taking and choosing how to build your portfolio. And this is actually a slide I often customize and use with companies. What's the benefit of your retirement plan? Well, it's convenient. You want to pay yourself first. And your contributions are yours. If you change employers, you could take it with you. That's different than the way folks used to retire with pensions, where you had to be at this one company for your entire working career for that to make economic sense. Of course, I mentioned there's tax advantages. It often is a very efficient vehicle to invest because you're pooling your personal retirement assets with your organizations and your colleagues, of course, without knowing what they're doing. And that has pricing power. So it should cost you less to invest in your 401k than if you go and invest outside on your own. And that's enhanced by starting early. And this is not something I like to encourage or promote, but you have the ability to access the funds in an emergency. Let's say if you take a loan. So when you think about, well, I can't save and lock this up for 40 years, you do have the ability to grab that. So the next step is to think about what makes your plan unique. Is there anything on this page that you say, oh, that's something I need to get smarter about, or this applies to me? The questions that I'm going to share in a minute are also going to help with this step in particular. Social Security is something that for women in particular, it's important to make a very thoughtful decision. 82% of women are entitled to survivor benefits, and that those benefits could have been higher if they delayed taking their own benefits until age 70. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that you want to think about, particularly if you've either been married, divorced, or widowed, be thoughtful about when you take your benefits. That's because past full retirement age, you actually continue to get 8% growth until you reach age 70. So it may make sense to encourage the spouse with the highest benefit to let it grow. And if you're widowed, if you think about starting with your benefit, and then you can end up switching to the highest benefit. Something that some people may not be aware of, again, because it has the potential to be a touchy subject, but if you were divorced and you were married for 10 years or longer, you're actually eligible qualify for benefits off of your ex-spouse's benefit. And they don't know that. I mean, they may know it generally speaking, but they're not informed that you're taking their benefit. That's as long as you don't get remarried. And then the other, I just think mind-blowing point on this topic is that the spouse could be divorced to 5 different individuals and all 5 could claim a benefit. So that's perhaps part of the reasons why the Social Security system needs a little bit of working on, a little bit of tweaking there. This is starting to get into the conversation about questions. You want to start to think about, what do I need to do today to get my financial house in order? And I would encourage you to get the thoughts in your head that are emotional. If I make a bad financial decision, I'm letting other people down, with those that are factual, meaning like, how much do I need to save for the type of retirement I want? And there's certain life events that makes you pause to think further about if it warrants a change. So if you have a change in marital status, change in family dynamics, perhaps now you're more of a caregiver. If you have to, if you're thinking about what an inheritance or an estate plan might look like, or of course, if you have a change in your employment status or your spouse does, that's a reason to look at it. Again, in the spirit of casting a very wide net in terms of the topics I'm covering, this is very important. I mentioned before, it's one of the 6 facets of financial planning, estate planning, and wealth transfer. To ensure, do you have a will? These are questions to ask yourself. Do you have a will? Have you thought about power of attorney for financial affairs? Have you thought about a power of attorney for medical decisions and a living will for quality of life decisions? And this is very important. Have you reviewed your beneficiaries? Some people don't realize that it doesn't matter what your will says, your 401k assets, your IRA assets, your 403b assets are going to pass by beneficiary designation. So let's say you were single when you started your job and you had since gotten married. Let's say initially you chose your brother or sister as the beneficiary. Well, guess what? That's who your beneficiary is unless you change it to your spouse. So that's something to be aware of. So any life event, a change in marital status, having children, all of those things could be triggers to take a closer look at these variables. And I just list them here. If any of these things are in your current purview, it's a reason to pause and think about some decisions. Lastly, it's, the idea of try to do no harm. So what are the things I could do to avoid common mistakes? And at a very high level, it's trying to make decisions with your head instead of your heart, at least when it comes to investing, because there's so many aspects of investing that are counterintuitive, meaning like it feels good to invest when my balance is higher. Well, if your balance is higher, it means you've had stronger performance, and perhaps maybe stocks are expensive. When you think about when do you want to buy something in your personal life, you want to buy things when they're on sale. The opposite is true with investing. At least our instinct is we want to buy things after they've gone up and perhaps they are expensive. So having a plan in advance, that's why the 401k, the 403b is great because it's an automated way to save. You're not being asked, do you want to save? Just set it and forget it. Revisit it as appropriate, of course. And trying to think past the next quarter, the next year, and combat that short-term focus, because it can be very intimidating if your assets go down in value. We've had a very strong market in the last 18 months. In fact, most major asset classes in 2023 were up. And I like to remind investors that that's not normal and that can't continue. So at some point, the markets could take a breather, your balance could be lower than what it is today. And you know what, that could be okay because you're not spending the money tomorrow. So thinking about there, not trying to be speculative, diversifying your portfolio, and just acknowledge what are the things that make you uneasy? Because right here is a visual of how we often feel when it comes to our account value. When it's going up, we feel real good. When it's going down, we feel real bad. And you know what? It's not necessarily impacting your ability to make good financial decisions or make progress in your financial plan. So there are certain things that I outline here that can help with this emotional struggle. It's having a diversified portfolio. It's having a plan and keeping with it, thinking long-term, rebalancing. So oftentimes there's tools available for that, but the idea that you have a target asset allocation, meaning, and I'm using an example here. Let's say you say, I have a 60% stock and 40% bond target, and that's just for illustrative purposes. If your portfolio grows from 60 to 70% stock, for instance, that could be a reason to rebalance. I'll tell you, in my personal accounts, I actually use technology and tools, and that's where investing today, in a lot of ways, it can be easier than it was in the past because you can automate some of that. And then just dollar cost averaging with cash. If you're investing in a 401k or 403b, you're doing exactly that, meaning you're putting the same dollar amount in each pay period. The market goes down, you're buying more shares at lower prices and thinking about opportunities. I mentioned before, it's time in the market, not timing the market that's important. The graph here illustrates that if you miss the 10 best days in the market, your return was actually a little more than half of what it would have been if you stayed fully invested. If you missed the 60 best days during this time period, this 20-year time period here, you went from having an average annual rate of return of 9.8% to actually losing 4% per year. And the reason that exists is because oftentimes the best days happen right around the worst days. And really, there's no way to identify where that's going. Over time, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on the specifics here, but this is an interesting graph. It shows you that, listen, there's going to be headlines that are disturbing. And there could be headlines that are disturbing in 2024. And guess what? There always has been. And over time, the financial markets, they take blips along the way, but over time, the financial markets have grown. And again, this is using a diversified portfolio. So here are some little tidbit strategies to help with financial success: a budget, asking for help as appropriate, knowing what your goals are, diversification, dollar cost average, and educating yourself. So this last section here, I'm going to run through quickly, but I think this is a great reference point. What's on your mind? And this is a very personal conversation, which is why I don't like to dedicate too much of my presentation time on it. It's more self-reflection. What are the things that make you nervous, that make you fearful? And I've outlined here in a variety of different topics. Well, for retirement, what are the questions on your mind? Well, I've already said multiple times, women tend to live longer than men. We need more money to fund our own retirement if we're retiring at the same age. That's just the way it is. You might be at a stage in your life where you're thinking, can I afford to change my work life to start a family? You could be thinking about, do I need long-term care insurance as you age? Will my money last me through retirement? Perhaps you have children or even grandchildren. You're thinking about, does it make sense to save for them? And how do I balance saving for education with saving for my own retirement and financial future? Maybe you're thinking about going to school yourselves. So the idea here is identifying what are some things you want to give more thought to. I mentioned before, life events are a great trigger to reevaluate your financial plan. According to MFS, 2/3 of women have delayed at least one life event due to their financial situation. So thinking about, what does that mean for you? Elder care, you may be the likely caregiver for aging parents or family members or friends. If you're taking time off of work to do that, you need to have a plan to kind of bridge that gap and see if you can afford to, and what does that mean? There's a whole host of resources out there. In some ways, it's almost too much information, but depending on where you are in this regard. Medicare, I could do a whole hour presentation on navigating Medicare. Again, not looking to overwhelm, you're just trying to identify what are the one or two things that in my personal financial journey I need to get smarter about. I mentioned estate planning. The key here is you don't want to be making important decisions in a time of crisis. So you do want to plan in advance and give some thought as to what you want to have happen if you're no longer here. The good news from a financial planning perspective is that we are planners. I've mentioned that. So that's your takeaway here. You should be asking questions. How do you keep yourself on track when it comes to a lot of these different topics? Where do you want to get smarter? And this is just interesting conversation. And I could bridge this into a conversation about, teaching financial basics to your family. But investing, saving money really tends to be a taboo topic. And it's something that we oftentimes avoid. I mentioned before, even in my own social circle, like I think about women tend to talk about everything but, right? And oftentimes we might not even be talking about our careers. We're talking about our kids, we're talking about our lives, depending on who we're interacting with and what life stage you're in. But giving some thought to, what was the best financial decision you've made? What was your earliest memory of money? Has that helped or has that hurt you? Are there decisions that you wish you hadn't made? What did you learn from that mistake? because everybody makes mistakes. They're just learning opportunities. And ultimately, why are you saving? Like, what's your vision for the future? And maybe your vision is just to get through the next 12 months and to make sure that you can feed your family. And that's totally fine and very admirable. For others, maybe it's different financial visions, which comes back to the point I began with, which is we are all unique individuals. I mentioned before, this is just a few tidbits, making damaging mistakes. You want to avoid them as a parent. So don't assume someone else is going to teach your child about money. I mean, in the school district I'm in, they're starting to introduce financial literacy into the curriculum, but like you need to own that. Not allowing your child to make mistakes, let them own that. Teaching only how to spend, sending mixed messages. And this is such an important point, and I'm going to share it, but I know that I'm coming up on time here, is that I actually had a friend whose child wanted a phone, and they were in second grade. Why do you want a phone? I want a phone because I want to buy things, because their vision of the phone is here and you're click, 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 you're paying Apple Pay. And they don't see the side where they actually sent the money in, that they paid the bill. So being aware of what the optics are of your financial life is important. Is to say that if you go to the store, optically, if you're using a credit card or your phone, so the person you're with, whether you're buying a whole new living room furniture or you're buying a gallon of milk, it costs the same amount. So being just aware of that, and getting the thought, no, we can't afford it, out of your vernacular, or maybe you can't afford it, but just using the word no and saying, well, no, if this is important to you, then you plan for it and you make that happen. And I oftentimes find that, the things that were so important in the moment are not actually that important in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to wrap up with, what are you going to commit to over the course of the next 6 months to improve your employees' financial health, to improve your own financial health? I have here my name, my email address and phone number. If you have questions as it relates to your how you're approaching this with your employees, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to end with this cartoon, and this is just thinking about what's the vernacular, how are we speaking to particularly our daughters, our granddaughters, our friends. I love this. Skip to the part where the princess creates multiple streams of income, builds wealth, and invests in cash flowing assets. So the idea of, what, my financial plan is to bet on a happily ever after. Nope, that's not the storyline I want to be telling my daughter. You're going to own your financial future, and that's going to lead to great things, no matter how your life plays out. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time. I hope you found this beneficial. And remember, one step at a time, just make your next right decision and think about what you could do for yourself over the next 6 months that would be helpful. Take care.